Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams, and this week I am joined by a special guest, Analysing Anfield debut for Andrew Beasley, also known as Base Tuned to Red on Twitter. How'd you feel, mate?
Yeah, good to be here. I'm nervous filling in for Mo. Obviously, he's done a great job on the podcast. I was sort of saying beforehand, I listen every week, so hopefully I can do some decent contributions, taking over from him at least in the short term.
Yeah, well, the situation with Mo, as we said last week, is up in the air. I did check the comments last week actually, and the support for him was unanimous, so we did hear that. But there's no update on that yet. That's still just kind of in the works. But in the meantime, as you say, I do have an opportunity to get in the odd special guest, and you are certainly one of them, mate. For those who aren't aware, for those who probably aren't on Twitter and things like that, I'd say Bees is probably a Liverpool analytics OG, to be honest. Certainly on the scene before I was.
Well, I'm quite a bit older than you, I think, as well. So that probably helped. But yeah, I mean, when sort of football stats first started becoming a thing, probably 2010, 2011, around then and stuff like that. And I was sort of getting interested in it and just noticing little bits and bobs from the very limited data you could get in those days. Things like, if you had a list of players who created chances, you were ahead of the guys who had the list of assists. It was that sort of level of insight at that point. But I was sort of into it from the beginning, always been quite mathematically minded. And obviously that's quite a long time ago now. So, I've got spreadsheets going back to like 2009 and stuff like that. So, it's been a long road. And obviously, no doubt the data will improve as well in the future. But when you think of what it started at, it's come on so much in the last sort of 10 years or so.
Yeah, I actually remember reading one of your pieces before we'd ever spoke, I think, and this was kind of before I was really into the whole number side of things, but it was around the time Liverpool were going to get Klopp, and I can't remember if it was on like Tompkins Times or if it was on maybe like your own website or WordPress or something, but it was along the lines of the expected goals numbers Klopp had posted at Dortmund, was for compared to his against, the difference he'd made as a coach. And I think the conclusion was along the lines of like, if he can deliver that at Liverpool, those performance numbers at Liverpool, with him for a ride basically. And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, like, that's an interesting way of putting it basically. And now I'm doing similar stuff nowadays. So yeah, it's good to have you on the show, mate. And yeah, like Dan Kennett the other week, obviously Dan Kennett will come on as a guest. We started the show with, I asked for his kind of headline catchphrase diagnosis of what is the problem with Liverpool this season. What is the kind of overriding issue? And I'm going to stick with that now to start this show. So in kind of a few words, a line, a sentence, whatever you want, kind of diagnose for us what you think has happened to Liverpool this season.
I mean, this could probably take up the rest of the show, couldn't it, really? Let's be honest.
Well, if you want, mate, feel free.
I think on the whole, it's a lot of small things combining at once to just make this sort of horror show of a season, basically, is the headline. I guess it all sort of breaks down into sections, doesn't it? Like, the team isn't pressing as well from the front. They were the masters of that, basically. And like last season, they were winning the ball in the final third over 7 times a game. And now it's about 5 times per game, which doesn't sound like a huge drop. But their possession has gone down as well. So you'd think, well, you should have more opportunities to win the ball back. And they haven't been doing that as well, which is understandable because it's sort of a new look front three. You've had the injuries feeding into that it's been very difficult to get a consistent lineup on the pitch. You see the likes of Arsenal and Newcastle probably having better than expected seasons. And I can't help but think a huge part of that is the fact they can play the same 11 players more or less every week, certainly far more than Liverpool. But I think it comes back to the sort of lack of pressure on the ball when the opposition have it. I mean, I keep thinking back to a game when Liverpool played Real Madrid a couple of years ago. It was behind closed doors and they lost 3-1. And a big part of the problem was Klopp saying, like, we didn't put enough pressure on the ball when they had it. It was too easy for them to make their passes. And at the time, it was something of a one-off, but it's sort of been the issue throughout the season. That game has just been repeated time and time again. And it's not just been Real Madrid who've been doing it to Liverpool. It's been some of the worst teams in the Premier League have been doing it to Liverpool, if not quite so consistently. So I think it all sort of starts from the front and everything else kind of goes from there. And I think some of it has been tactical. Obviously, we saw a bit of mid-block stuff, earlier this year. Some of it has been to an extent deliberate, but it seems like they've moved away from what made Klopp's Liverpool great. And the players haven't been in good enough form for them to be able to do that and still win games of football on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, mate. I think that's a really good analysis, really. I myself have been a bit concerned about the press from the front. So I think, getting Nunes to grips with that. I think Gakpo has come in, probably made a bit more of an impression on the defensive side than Nunes did, but still getting to grips with it. Diaz has been out. We've had Carvalho in at times. Elliott is a big presser in the numbers, at least. But, maybe doesn't have the ball-winning tendencies just yet. But I think the whole pressure on the ball thing is a good shout, because I do think the majority of that in previous seasons, I suppose, has kind of stemmed from the engine room, which is what Klopp calls it, and he calls it that for a reason. And, we used to label the likes of Wijnaldum, Henderson, Milner as workhorses, essentially. And that was what they were. They were all about pressure on the ball. They were all about providing Liverpool with a platform to dominate games and control games. And I sent out a newsletter last night, actually. And I think it's interesting that even last season, as we were going towards a quadruple, we all kind of knew at the time that we were too heavily reliant on Thiago to control games for us. And whenever he was absent, it just felt a lot more up in the air as to whether Liverpool would win a game. We get to the summer, we have the opportunity to get in somebody else to help them do that. Tchouaméni was the target, obviously, which made a lot of sense. Shame we didn't get him. But when we didn't get him, we went into the new season with the same group of midfielders. Thiago gets injured in the first game. And now we've kind of snowballed a little bit. And now, as you say, we've got a number of other issues ongoing. Confidence is now a thing. All the centre-backs look like they fell off a cliff. Fabinho looks a different player. There's loads of it. I mean, the attack now looks a little bit toothless all of a sudden, out of nowhere. So I do think you're right that it's spiraled from a lot of things, but I do think the main thing really is just putting pressure on the opposition. And we haven't really been doing that enough this season.
No, and I think as well, it's something I keep coming back to, is when you look back through the Premier League era, like apart from 2019-20, whenever Liverpool have finished second in the league, the next season has then always been terrible, apart from 1920. Obviously, they won the league. They maintained it. I'm sure the confidence boost of winning the Champions League probably helped. But there was a history at the club of them putting everything into finishing second, just falling short, and then just things snowballing out of control the following season. We saw it in 2002, 2009, 2014. I mean, I think that makes for a good comparison season as well, actually. 2014-15, obviously different style of play, slightly under Brendan Rodgers. But, that season, the Liverpool attack basically dried up, which it seems to be doing at the moment. You had Rodgers trying various different tactical things to cover for defensive frailties. We've seen a bit of that from Klopp as well. So it seems like there's sort of parallels to be drawn with that. But the main issue is it seems to be a common thing that they just fall off a cliff the season after finishing second. And it's quite annoying, isn't it?
It is, and you mentioned availability there as well in terms of players with the likes of Newcastle and the likes of Arsenal. I've just had a look back at when Liverpool won the league a few seasons ago. And in that season, we had 7 players who started at least 31 Premier League games or more. And those players as well, I mean, Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Gini Wijnaldum, Andy Robertson, Roberto Firmino, Mo Salah and Sadio Mane. They're absolute pillars of what Liverpool do. And you've also got Alisson Becker there on 29 starts and Jordan Henderson on 26. So I do think that's a massive thing as well. The whole injury issue that's ongoing at Liverpool is a bit crazy. I mean, right now, we look a little bit okay. I thought it was a bit concerning though the other day when Klopp had his press conference and he said something along the lines of like, previous seasons, like maybe at Dortmund as well, when he got players back, we kind of got back to normal. And he kind of said in his presser that like we've now got players back and nothing has changed, which is a little bit of a concern. And we are going to touch on Klopp later in the show. To be honest, that's one that we've avoided. I haven't actually tackled the whole Klopp sacking topic and where we stand on that and his performance for this season. So we are going to touch on that this week. A bit of a delicate one, I'm sure. But before we do, sadly, we have to touch on this week. We've got Chelsea and City to get through quickly.
Don't want to dwell on those, really.
No. It hasn't been a great week. I mean, as a side note for me, I'm now up to 10th in the Analysing Anfield FPL League, so that's not a bad thing. But in terms of Liverpool, it's been dire, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I mean, you don't want to overreact because obviously these are two very difficult games. Like Liverpool's last 3 games have been against teams who are Champions League quarter-finalists this season. It's not surprising that a struggling Liverpool team has not taken too much from those games. You know, you look at Man United, they're having a better season than Liverpool, but they got beat 3 at Man City and they drew at Chelsea. Same results as Liverpool have just had. But obviously, when it comes on the back of everything that's gone before, it just feels very demoralising, as this was, going to be the start of the push for Champions League qualification. And obviously, in both games, in a lot of ways, were quite similar. Man City and Chelsea, and actually Real Madrid, if we just look back to that as well, they all had 4 up-to-define clear-cut chances, and Liverpool didn't have any. And in all 3 of those games, Liverpool had 1 shot in the second half. Yeah. And you can add those 3 shots from those 3 games together and it comes to 0.1 expected goals. So when you frame it like that, you could say, well, Liverpool conceded 4 at City and nothing at Chelsea. But it could easily have been 4 at both, or it could have been 2 at both, or whatever. It's just the way the sort of goals have fallen. Like Chelsea, as everyone knows, I mean, their forwards are very out of form. I mean, with half decent finishing or Alisson just having a sort of routine game rather than his sort of customary excellent game, Liverpool probably lose there as well. Let's be honest, the XG was something like 2 to 0.2 or something like that. So
yeah,
these last 3 games, whilst you have to acknowledge that they were very difficult games, they've played out in almost identical fashion. Lots of big chances for the opponents, nothing for Liverpool, and nothing at all basically in the second halves of games. So when you think that it's Arsenal next, I mean, obviously slightly different in that it's at Anfield rather than away from home, but it's hard not to assume that the same thing is possibly going to happen again.
Yeah, it really hasn't been great. I mean, Chelsea did score twice, to be fair to them, but they were ruled out for very marginal. I suppose that was a bit of luck, from our side of things. But yeah, you touched on the numbers there. They are not good numbers at all. Liverpool in both games against Chelsea and Manchester City posted an expected goals of 0.3. In other words, you're not scoring. And in terms of defensive side of the game, City created chances with 2.9 expected goals, and Chelsea created shots with 2.2 expected goals. So they're pretty comfortable a 2-0 and a 3-0 loss, really. Which is just not very good. And again, the attacking side is particularly worrying because that's one thing that Klopp's Liverpool have kind of always delivered at some point or another. It's always been, maybe a lot of that stems from the fact it's always been Salah, Mane, Fabinho in the team, and they've been relentlessly available and they've been relentlessly delivering goals and creating chances and things like that. But right now, even with a few players back, like Jota's back and Gakpo, Diaz hasn't played, to be fair, yet, but the attacking side of the attacking fall off, I think, stems from the defensive kind of issues that we've got and the desire to suddenly show attitude and mentality. And on the back of showing that, you kind of stop doing everything else, really.
It's another season to compare, I guess, is 2021, when obviously there was all the injuries to the centre-backs and different players having to fill in there and stuff like that. And at least initially, it basically blunted the attack because the whole sort of build-up play went. And again, that's something else we've seen quite a lot this season. I mean, I think With the Chelsea game, I guess it's kind of no surprise they didn't create a lot. I mean, 4 of their top 5 players for creating clear-cut chances this season, they weren't playing. And the only one who was, Nunes, most of his clear-cut chances have been for Salah, who wasn't playing.
Yeah.
So you can kind of understand to an extent that if Klopp felt he had to rotate the team, that was going to come at a cost. But at the same time, it wasn't really clear how Liverpool were trying to score a goal. Like, I wasn't really sure. All right, you haven't got Trent, you haven't got Robson, you haven't got Salah. These things happen. You've got to give them a rest at times and stuff. But how were they going to score? It just didn't look very likely. There was that probably one moment, Jota maybe could have had a decent chance, but he took a touch instead of hitting it first time.
Yeah.
I think it was possibly Jones played the through ball or something to him, but there was very little. I don't really know how they were ever going to score in that game.
Well, one thing I thought was curious about his selection was obviously Chelsea playing a back three of late, wing backs, and the 3 players that we kind of had, and we probably were always going to have going into the game, were probably going to be our fullbacks in terms of building the game. But we dropped Trent and we dropped Robbo, and we bring in Gomez and Tsimikas, who just add. Certainly when it comes to Gomez, I mean, I'm not saying Trent deserves to play by any means, but in terms of what he does on the ball, at least, there's a big difference between the two. So the players that we had free, players with time on the ball, couldn't really move us up the park particularly well. We were kind of man-marked in the middle in terms of Felix dropping back onto Fabinho, and then their midfield 3 just picking up Firmino and our 2 number 8s. So we just kind of had no real way of moving forward. But you've just touched on the fixtures there in terms of what we've suffered from lately against Madrid, Bournemouth even, Chelsea and City. Obviously the recurring theme there is that they're all away from home. Do you have any take on what that's about, apart from the whole cliche line of you don't want to scrap, they're not willing to put the fight up, they haven't got the character, they haven't got the leaders? Is there anything more to it than that for you, or is it just variance or what?
I think a lot of it is variance. I think some of these results could have happened at Anfield this season. I don't think it's that big a divide. And then you have things like the game with Bournemouth, and there was another one I'm struggling to remember from earlier this season. But Liverpool had lots of decent chances. They've had games where they've had decent chances without playing well. Like even with their struggles recently, I mean, they're still averaging 3 clear-cut chances per game in the league this season, which you look back through history, very few teams sort of hit that mark. So the season as a whole, they've been creating enough chances, but they've just been really wasteful. I think it was possibly Nottingham Forest. They had a few decent chances as well. Some of them were from, only perhaps from set pieces rather than open play.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so, they've had games where they haven't played well, don't get me wrong, but they've had chances to get more points than they have, and they haven't taken them. And it's just another one of these factors. I wrote a thing about it earlier this week for the Echo. Like their conversion rate for clear-cut chances is the second worst they've had in any of the last 12 seasons, I think it is. And as soon as you're not scoring goals, you're immediately putting pressure on a midfield and a defence, which has clearly looked not up to the task of that sort of thing. So that there have been some poor performances on the road, but they have had chances in some of the games, not this week, but some of the games, to take more from them. But I mean, it's hard to remember a season that has gone as badly as this away from home, because what is it, 3 wins, I think, so far? And
yeah, something like that, yeah.
Theoretically, the remaining games are all against struggling teams, but they're struggling teams who are desperate for points. And as we've seen at Bournemouth, at Nottingham Forest, these teams can sort of do a number on Liverpool if Liverpool don't take their chances. And the same thing could potentially happen again, I guess.
Yeah, well, I give my take on the away thing recently. I can't remember what show I did on. I don't know if it was somewhere else other than Analysing Anfield. But my basic, very generic take on it was that I think away from home, we are just more inclined to be attacked by teams who are playing with their home support. There's an added emphasis to basically have a goal. Whereas if they come to Anfield, it's a bit more backs against the wall, and we'll take a point and things like that. And I think this season, whenever Liverpool have been attacked, they haven't really been able to cope for the most part, and we've only really gained control over games, I think, when the game state has changed, as in the opposition have maybe gained a goal lead or something like that. But you touched on Liverpool's attacking numbers there. I do think it is interesting because if you look at the season as a whole, as you say, only City and Arsenal average more shots on a per 90 basis. And in terms of expected goals on a per 90 basis, only City, Arsenal, and Brighton actually are above Liverpool for that. But Liverpool comfortably top 4, I've said all season, for their attack. Maybe not specifically the finishing. The finishing hasn't been particularly there. But in terms of Liverpool's attacking game, I don't think that needs too much work. The work that does need to begin, the improvements that do need to be made, they are without the ball. On the defensive side of the game when it comes to pressure and things like that. And I suppose that brings us on to one of the talking points of the week that we've had, one of my talking points at least, and that is Fabinho. I want to ask you about him. He's an interesting one for me because I think you can look at Henderson, suggest he's maybe over the hill. You can look at Milner and certainly suggest that. You can look at Thiago and probably suggest that. You can look at maybe Jones, Elliott, Carvalho and suggest that they're not really at the hill yet. But with Fabinho, he feels like a player who should still be delivering. He feels like a player who's not guaranteed to be moved on or in the summer. So he's one who I'm always curious to get people's opinions on as to whether you think it's a blip or just a sudden rapid decline, really.
I hope it's a blip. I fear it's a decline.
Yeah.
I think it was sort of interesting when you look back now. He was possibly struggling a little bit towards the end of last season, and then he suffered an injury. And I can't help thinking they rushed him back because it was the Champions League final. And I'm sure if Liverpool weren't in that, perhaps he wouldn't have, been rushed back quite so quickly. So he plays in that. He then goes to Korea and plays with Brazil immediately afterwards. There's then a shortened summer because of needing to fit stuff in before the World Cup. Then he's back in with Liverpool straight away. So I think all these things sort of combine together. You've then also got the fact, I'm sure you've probably seen the numbers, but, his career minutes, whilst he's sort of 29, his career minutes are more similar to somebody who's 35. And that obviously takes a toll. He's been playing sort of 4,000 plus minutes every season for however many years it is now. And that takes a toll as well. So I think, as with the team as a whole, it's kind of all these factors together are not doing him any favours. I don't think he's necessarily finished. And I think that's the same for a lot of these players in the Liverpool team who are being sort of questioned. But I do worry that maybe this version of Liverpool and the way they play is finished, and there needs to be some serious changes. Like, I think whether it's a change of formation, but you get some decent young midfielders in with who could just run a bit more and sort of cover Fabinho in that sense. And I think he could still be an asset next season. And I also think with the turnover there's going to be in the midfield, guys like Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain leaving, probably Milner, or even if he stays, he isn't going to play much. Like, they probably can't afford to just sort of sell Fabinho this summer, I wouldn't think. They probably need to see if they could get a decent season out of him next year while Bajcetic sort of continues to develop and probably take over in the long term. So, as I say, I hope he's not finished. And I'm not sure that he is, but I do worry that, perhaps he is ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, just watching him the past week, he's just had so many moments I've felt where he's just been a second late, and he's either been beaten or he's fouled his man, or he's just that sort of thing. And that really is all it takes. It just takes a second decline in terms of like your timing or your reading of the play or your running ability. You only need to be a second later than you usually are. And rather than regaining the ball with immaculate timing, you're instead giving away a foul.
Yeah.
He is 29. He's got a contract until 2026, which suggests to me that Liverpool didn't really intend on selling him at any point this summer.
No.
Potentially next summer. But this summer, that contract tells me that the plan originally, at least, was for him to definitely stay again and do another year. I do think he probably will But I suppose you just do have that question mark because of his decline. And I think it's interesting if you look at who Liverpool are linked with in the transfer market. We're not really linked with any sixes. They're all kind of eights. They're all players who will put pressure on the ball in the final third and on the edge in the middle third rather than extinguishing fires in slightly deeper spaces, which is what Fabinho's been great at. But lately, hasn't been. So he's an interesting one for me in terms of what we're going to do with him. And in terms of like looking ahead to the summer, I am curious about who you maybe think we should target. I assume you would like us to get Jude Bellingham.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you heard of Jude Bellingham? He's quite good.
Yeah, he's not bad, is he?
He's not bad. Obviously, guys like us, writing for Echo and .com and stuff, seem to write a Bellingham piece probably most weeks because people love that sort of thing, and understandably so. I mean, he's a fantastic player, and he would add so much to Liverpool. I'm quite intrigued by the Mason Mount links as well. Was talking about it with Dave on the morning Bullington earlier, and about how whether Lampard going back, whether Mount will play, and whether that'll affect his decision and stuff like that. But I think he would be a really good addition for Liverpool if they could get him in. A lot's going to depend on Bellingham, isn't it? Inevitably, because if they get him and how much they'll have to spend on him, well, what's left? Do they then sell somebody like Curtis Jones or maybe Fabinho to bring in the money to buy a Mount and stuff like that? I mean, obviously they'll know what their sort of budget is and how that will all sort of play out and things like that. But I think Mount would be a really good addition.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm a big fan of Mount. I think he does feel very, very Klopp to me. He feels like a natural presser when he's defending. I think he's naturally inclined to just be proactive and chase the ball, and he does put a foot in. And he kind of reminds me of, I think I might have said this a few months back, but he's not quite as special. But I think in terms of his profile, I don't think he's that dissimilar to what Gavi kind of offers in terms of being a real dog without the ball. But with the ball, he's very technical, can play a pass, can even play like as a 10 or as a forward if you need him to. But I think he would be best as a number 8. And he's still only 24, I think, English, homegrown. I think you're weakening one of your rivals if you get him. So I would absolutely be completely sold on Mason Mount if we were to get him. And I'd go. I mean, if you was to ask me, Mason Mount 50 million. I think 50 million is fine for Mason Mount. If you get higher than that, you're getting a little bit of a nosebleed, I think. But I think he's a top player, and I think in terms of Bellingham, I mean the rumours seem good. I mean, it looks like Liverpool still, even despite the whole Champions League thing, very much in the fray to land them. And I think that the recent news as well about maybe Matthias Nunes going a little bit cold, I think also probably bodes well for Bellingham's arrival, because I think if Bellingham wasn't going to come, maybe Nunes is a kind of alternative who's not quite as well-rounded, has lots of potential on his game. But I think the fact that we're kind of going cold on that, and Wolves, the rumour is that Wolves are going to keep him, I think bodes well. There's a few other players in the Premier League who I think are applicable to Liverpool's issues. I think Moises Caicedo is an obvious solution. His teammate, Alexis McAllister, I'm a massive fan of. It'd be interesting to see where Declan Rice ends up, but then Declan Rice is a bit more of a 6, so maybe he's not as much of a target for Liverpool, considering Klopp wants to kind of install high pressure again, higher up the pitch. But it's going to be interesting to see who we end up with, because it's a summer that Liverpool absolutely have to get right, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, if they get this wrong, assuming they finish outside the top 4 this season, as looks likely, if they don't get the transfer business right, it's going to be very difficult to get back in. And once that happens, you see with sort of other clubs how these things can sort of drag on for a couple of years, and so it is hugely important, as you say. I guess the good thing with Bellingham, you sort of feel like because he's young enough, Liverpool could say, well, come on, help us get back into the Champions League.
Yeah.
And if we don't manage it, well, we can still sell you to Real Madrid anyway or whatever. Like, he's so young that he could do a couple of years at Liverpool and hopefully get them back up to the top. But if not, it's not like his career will be over and stuff like that. I mean, he's another one, just to tie back to Fabinho, he's another player who's got much more minutes in his legs than a player of his age would normally have. It sort of feels like now is the best time to get him, because further down the line he's going to have tremendous amount of playing time under his belt and stuff like that. But I think getting him could solve quite a lot of problems. Not all of Liverpool's problems, certainly, but they would immediately be in much better shape, I think, with someone like Bellingham. And the addition of Mount, I was just going to mention as well, has been comparisons with Lallana, and I think that's fair. I think Klopp would love him for, if he did turn out to be that sort of player. You get Bellingham and Mount, even if you got nobody else. I'm not saying it's a perfect summer, but I think it would be a very good summer.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are two real additions there. And obviously Liverpool's weakest department is midfield. And if you was to get into comfortable England internationals, both of whom are like elite players, in my opinion, you would be really strengthening that department. And obviously you would see Harvey Elliott come on again, probably Bajcetic would press on again. And in terms of pressure on the ball, and Fabinho maybe getting a bit more protection, he would then be fielded alongside two number 8s who can certainly run, still in the primes of the career. Like I saw the viz that you posted about the kind of lack of Liverpool players or midfielders. It might have been specifically between the ages of like 22 to 28, was it? Something like that.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it was just for the midfielders. Yeah, they've had 300 minutes or so from Curtis Jones, who's 22, and 300 or so from Naby Keita, who's 28. And there's that's it for that sort of age range. And the other 19 teams in the league have had an average of 70% of their midfield minutes from players aged 22 to 28, and Liverpool have had 7%. And again, keep referring to Newcastle having a good season. Apart from about half an hour they've given to Matt Ritchie, all of their midfield minutes have come from that age range. And again, it's not the be-all and end-all. If they sign Bellingham, he's outside that age range. Manchester City and Arsenal are down towards the bottom end of, number of minutes that have been given to players in that age range. But ultimately, it looks like it makes a difference, and it's a big sort of gaping hole in the Liverpool team. And I think not to the same extent, but you could play a similar game with the other parts of the team. With the back four, with the centre backs, you've got Van Dijk and Matip, who are sort of nearing the ends of their careers, and you've got Konate and Gomez, who are young, and obviously up front you've got Salah, Firmino. Right, he'll be going soon, but obviously Nunez is very young, so. I might have to do the chart for the whole team, but basically, a bit of a peak age void at Liverpool compared to certainly their rivals and teams who are having better seasons than they are.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it is such an oversight, really, when you think about it. Last summer, I mean, Tchouaméni was an ideal target, and we have said that a few times on this podcast. But to not source an alternative, I just think it was such a mistake. And I think Klopp seemed to realise really late in the window. I think Matthias Nunes was maybe kind of like a target, and I think that was when Klopp come out and said I'd be willing to take more risks than FSG or something like that. But yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think with Klopp as well, I think he has more faith in his players than a lot of fans do.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough, because a lot of them have delivered fantastic things for him, but I think he has a lot of faith in them. Not necessarily too loyal, but he's got a lot of faith. And I think this season he's found that, that's maybe cost him.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on the fact City and Arsenal there are also playing relatively old midfielders, if you like. I mean, Granit Xhaka is 30. Thomas Partey is 29. Ilkay Gundogan still looks brilliant. I think he's about 32 or something like that, 33 maybe. Mm-hmm. But I think one big thing to remember with all that is that I just feel like Liverpool's game is a lot more intense in terms of it's just a bit more basketball. It's a bit more high tempo. City's tempo is really slow compared to Liverpool's, and they accelerate the game, really careful moments, and they can predict when the ball's going to be lost and all press like dogs for 10 seconds before regaining the ball. Liverpool's just feels a bit more, I suppose, entertaining, if you could call it. I mean, it's a bit more chaotic, isn't it? It's a bit more full pitch, bit more transition, which is natural considering we've got Klopp in charge of the team. And for that reason, I do think that the midfield department in particular, but the players as a whole, all the players, they have to be really mobile and really energetic and full of youth and vigor and all that. I mean, it's the typical Red Bull model, really, isn't it? You would not have any Red Bull team with an average age of 29 or whatever Liverpool's currently is at the moment. But it brings us on to the big talk. I've been avoiding this one, as I said, but we might as well tackle it because it's I suppose it's growing. It's not like, I don't know. But in terms of Jurgen Klopp, anyway, what have you made of his season, mate? In terms of as an individual, I suppose, you know, his performance as a manager / coach.
Well, yeah, I think it is fair to talk about it now because, I mean, he himself has even sort of made reference to it with the other sackings that have happened. He's basically saying, he sort of hinted that, well, I might not be here if it wasn't for sort of past seasons and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone would probably agree that he's not had a great season. It all seems to sort of, how much of this is on him, but it sort of stems to they got the pre-season wrong. And everything seems to have sort of spiraled from there. And I think you can look at a lot of the substitutions, you know, when Liverpool need a goal, you know, they seem to be taking Núñez off and stuff like this. How much of that is being... Sorry.
I actually thought it was curious that he took off Fabinho against Chelsea. I thought Fabinho was our best player at the time. I think off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone else who looked as close to their normal self, apart from Alisson, of course. Yeah. But he takes him off first. I thought that was curious.
Yeah, I think you could question a lot of the substitutions. I mean, something I've written this week is looking about Liverpool's lack of goals in second halves. And you sort of feel like that's kind of on the manager in the sense of, you know, making the most out of substitutions and stuff like this. If you look at Liverpool's last 19 league games, their last half season, they've only scored 11 second half goals. And 6 of those came against Man United. Now, that was brilliant. I mean, I was there. Whatever else happens this season, I've witnessed Liverpool beat Man United 7-0. So I almost don't care about the rest of it. But, you know, without that game, the other 18 games in the last half season, they've scored 5 second half goals. And only one of them, which was Van Dijk against Wolves, has changed the result in their favour. The others were sort of extending leads or clawing back deficits, but not clawing them back enough and stuff like that. So you've got half a season where they've scored 1 second half goal that really made any difference to anything beyond us enjoying Man United getting battered. So that sort of thing does not reflect well on the manager. You know, these changes that he's making are not sort of making much difference to these games. You know, he'll argue, well, in some of these games we were already ahead. It didn't matter. We didn't need second half goals, and that's right. But that sort of thing just stands out a long way to me. It's the sort of thing you want from your manager is making these changes to, you know, recover in these games. You know, they've failed to win half of these games, so it's not like they didn't need goals in any of them. There was a lot where they did need second half goals, and it hasn't been happening. So that, for one thing, is what makes me feel that he's not had a great season. I should point out before I forget, I absolutely do not think he should go at this point. You know, before anyone starts thinking I'm saying that, I am not saying that. But at the same time, the start of next season, if Liverpool start poorly, the pressure is only going to build from there. And I don't know necessarily whether FSG would fire him if that were to happen, but the pressure will build. Does he start to think it's time to walk away? That's another thing. I mean, if Liverpool have a terrible end to this season, he said he's willing to stay and do the rebuild, but is he actually, when push comes to shove? I mean, we can only speculate, obviously. He seems like a man of his word. I think if you look throughout his career, he's, you know, signed this deal for another 3 seasons. But if Liverpool just sort of finish 10th and the season just disintegrates, then questions will be asked. They're already being asked, but they might be being asked a bit more loudly than a lot of people are prepared to at the moment. I mean, what's your view on how he's done this year?
I don't think he's had a great season. I agree with you in terms of right now, it's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Klopp is still very much the right man. If I was in charge, if I was a sporting director, whatever, it wouldn't even cross my mind. It's absolutely not a solution yet, because I think there's issues to be resolved on the pitch. I think he's squeezed absolutely everything he possibly can from the group, but particularly the midfield. I always go back to it. And we haven't yet upgraded that midfield yet. So once we do, then we can reassess moving forward. But I think his initial midfield decision kind of fostered the bad season, if you like. Obviously, we missed out on Tchouaméni, and the solution was give Milner a new contract. First game of the season, Thiago gets injured. We draw against Fulham, then I think we draw against Palace, and then we lose against Man United. Then it's panic stations because I think Keita was also injured at the time. Klopp starts
Almost
agitating.
Certainly.
Yeah. Klopp starts agitating for the midfielder. We don't really have plans to get one, so we end up loaning Arthur Melo, who is another injury-prone midfielder, who is absolutely not a Jurgen Klopp player and not a player who's going to put pressure on the ball. So there's your initial issue right there. And I think throughout the season, it's worth noting that he's managed injuries consistently. I'm not sure how much of that is his fault. We have no idea. In terms of his substitutions, I do think they've been a bit curious at times, and I think he maybe seems more inclined than ever to make substitutions that seem pre-planned and fitness-focused rather than impacting the game and changing proceedings and things like that. And I think his tactical approach has become increasingly galaxy brain because of potentially the impact of either Linda's or this desperate search for evolution. And I think that impacted us at the start of the season when it comes to where Trent was popping up and things like that. But I think in terms of there's been some suggestions that like Klopp should adjust his approach to kind of compensate the players that he currently has because they're not the players that he had 3 years ago. I understand that, but even in the summer, you're going to tackle that and you're going to address that problem by getting in the kind of player that you had 3 years ago. You would be making short-term adjustments there at the expense of like what you're doing long-term. So I still think that it's a transfer window issue, but I think it's quite ominous that really, if you look at it, I think he's probably got till Christmas, to be honest. I think if at Christmas we are still like this, I think he potentially walks. I think he would walk before Liverpool sacked him.
Yeah.
But when you actually think that we've had a lot of different points this season, we've had players returning from injury, we've had a new signing in Gakpo, and we've had a Christmas break, a warm weather training camp, and the World Cup, and all that. Nothing's changed. Nothing.
No,
go on.
I say that's what sort of concerns me. Like it's sort of similar to 2021 in the sense of all the injuries. And that season, he managed to get it back on track, and he picked Phillips and Reece Williams to play centre back, which people may not have done, but he did it, and it worked out. But there just hasn't been any sign of anything he's trying working or doing anything perhaps that extreme. And it's a different scenario, and there's a lot more miles on the clock on a lot of the players and stuff like that, the ones that are available. But yeah, it just sort of feels like nothing he's trying has really worked all that well.
Well, he has tried an awful lot as well. That's worth throwing in there. We've had 4-3-3, 4-4-2, diamond. There's been kind of like a 4-2-2-2 kind of alternative thing recently. We've went back towards a mid block at times. Obviously, Núñez has started playing out wide, Gakpo through the middle, playing like Firmino. We have done a lot. He's dropped a lot of the key performers. Henderson and Fabinho, I think, missed about 4 or 5 games in a row. Naby Keita and Besetic were starting every game.
Mm-hmm.
He's done kind of everything, really, and nothing has really impacted him, anything. It's not just results, which is what it was kind of a few seasons ago when we had that blip. It's also performances now. We are not really much of a elite team in the numbers, performance-wise, particularly defensively. But again, I would go back to I've said all season that it's a transfer market problem. It's the kind of issue that can't really be resolved internally because we don't really have an engine room at the minute, in my opinion. So once we get that, I will then kind of start from scratch almost with my perception on it. But if it stays the same for half of the season next season, that's when you kind of panic stations and do we call time on this basically, because then it would be weird, because then it's kind of like, well, everything has kind of happened to enforce the change, but no change has happened. It's almost a case now of the manager's no longer getting the most out of the players. The players are kind of performing beneath their level, and they have been for 18 months. By Christmas, I'm talking by next Christmas. But I'm getting ahead of myself there.
Well, maybe a little bit, but I think it's a fair question to ask, as we say. I think, as we say, the pressure will build if they start next season badly. There's no doubt about that. I think the thing to remember is, obviously, if let's say that Klopp left this summer, whether he was sacked or whether he quit or whatever, every club in Europe would be on the phone to his manager, to his agent, to try and say, does Klopp want to come and manage us and stuff like this. And Liverpool, almost certainly, whoever their next manager is, will almost certainly be a step down from Klopp as well, whenever he goes, because he's elite. He's, I would say arguably the best for what he's achieved with the sort of relative financial backing he's had compared to, Man City in this country and Bayern Munich in Germany and stuff like that, So it is important not to lose sight of that. Any club would take Klopp probably in a heartbeat, more or less. So we don't want to overreact in that sense. But yeah, he's not had a good season, but hopefully a bit of a sort of refresh over the summer for him, some of the players, the transfer market, as you say, bringing in the right players, and things can sort of pick up again. But if they don't, we might be having this conversation in September and October and November and December next season or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, what I will say is I do think he deserves massive praise for essentially not completely losing the plot.
Yeah.
Because for the past, 8-10 months of the season or whatever it's been, bottom line is Klopp's a winner, and we know we have seen that when results don't go his way, he can be a bit spiky and things like that. And you've got to bear in mind, Liverpool were out of every cup competition by March, and we've had some pretty embarrassing defeats in terms of Real Madrid and Manchester City recently, and we've had lots of kind of like false dawns, things like that. And I think obviously throughout this, Klopp's had to consistently show up for these interviews and press conferences and things like that, and he's had to basically explain, listen, why are your team bad? Why aren't you winning games? Why aren't you winning games? Why aren't you winning games? And I'm sure he probably just wants to say, I don't know what the players are doing. They're not performing to the usual level. I haven't got a midfield department. Van Dijk's fell off a cliff. Where's Fabinho? I'm sure he wants to say all of this, but and I'm sure the likes of Antonio Conte, Jose Mourinho, they would all, Thomas Tuchel, they would all have said this, and by now they'd have probably all basically burnt the bridge and left. And Klopp has been, I don't know what the word is really, but he's still managing the ship, and he still looks relatively composed, hungry. He doesn't look particularly tired. He still looks up for the fight. And I do think he deserves credit for that, because that's very much easier said than done.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with what you say. He could have been much harder on the players in the press than he has been, and possibly wants to. But I'm sure he knows. Obviously, he knows he's got to keep these guys on side. Whatever happens in the summer, there's not going to be a massive turnover of players. A lot of players he's picking now, he's going to be picking next season as well. So he can't sort of burn his bridges with them, as you say. But yeah, it must be difficult. I'm sure, like anything, but like when they're not winning week after week, the endless sort of press conferences is not going to be easy for him to take. I mean, there was that issue after one of the games where he sort of said, I'm not going to answer a question from you or something like that. And I think he got the wrong journalist anyway. Like, it's just not a good look when stuff like that happens. And it just sort of hints at the pressure he's inevitably feeling. I mean, managing Liverpool is always pressured, even when they're doing well. But when they're doing badly, I mean, it's got to be one of the most pressured jobs there is, I would imagine. And I think as well, he's tried not to make a thing of it, but like, how last season ended must have been so like mentally like draining and demoralizing, just going through 63 games to only, in inverted commas, win 2 cups. I mean, that's not a bad season for most teams, but it could have been so much better. To come so close and to only have the sort of 2 cups must have been hard to take. Never mind what happened in Paris, sort of outside the stadium, and that's the toll that may have taken as well. So all that mental pressure to start the next season so soon, and to start it not well, and it's, you know, as we've been saying, this whole podcast really kind of snowballed from there. Lots of little issues snowballing to leave them in quite a hole. And with 10 games to go, I don't think they're going to make the top 4, to be completely honest. I mean, I might change that view if they put in a good performance and beat Arsenal on the weekend. Things will look a lot better if they do, but as I sit here now, I don't think that's going to happen. So then it's like, well, where do they go from there, really?
Yeah, we probably do have to beat Arsenal for that, I think. But yeah, I mean, I've spoken about a few times that what you kind of want from any manager, if you're targeting any manager in the market or anything like that, what you generally want is a coach who is kind of delivered a proven ability to get more from his players than he realistically should. Someone who overperforms with a group. Klopp's overperformed consistently throughout his whole career at Mainz, Dortmund, now Liverpool. He shouldn't have reached the heights that he did at each club. Consistently has, and that's because he's special when it comes to doing that. And that's why it largely makes sense to view getting rid of him as kind of like the last solution on the list, almost. For me, it is the last solution on the list. We are certainly not there yet. But as I said, if Liverpool continue like this, it will get to a point where that becomes more of a solution. And last season, at the end of the season, when Arsenal finished 5th, I think it was, I appeared on an Arsenal podcast, Football London, and the lad who I appeared on with the host was a bit more open, I suppose, to changing the coach, changing the manager, and getting rid and things like that. And I kind of explained my point to him. Reasons for keeping him was, did he think that Arsenal's level, results, whatever, were being limited by the coach or the level of the players? And at the time, I said it was the players, and he kind of agreed. And then in the summer, they go and get 2 Premier League winners in Zinchenko and Jesus, and they get in Fabio Vieira and Thomas Partey suddenly fit every week, and it made a big difference, essentially. So one question I do have for you to kind of close is, Liverpool this season, obviously currently 6th, it's not very good. Would you say Liverpool's performances / results are kind of being defined by the players and their individual level as a group, or the coach?
Am I only allowed to pick one and not just throw them all under the
bus? No. I'll give you my answer. My answer would have been a bit of both. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of both. But at the same time, I think if I had to lean to one or the others, then I'm going with the players. But how much of that is their fault and how much of it is, you know, the sort of issues we've been discussing is sort of hard to say. But for so many of them to underperform in one season, Klopp has to take some responsibility for that. Of course he does, but he can't have been expecting this to happen, and it has happened, and it's up to him to sort it. I mean, I think the Arsenal example you gave is quite an interesting one, because they've obviously shown how quickly things can change, and a team with a couple of good signings, a team can turn for the better fairly quickly. I think all right, they changed their manager, but Man United have also shown that they were as bad last season as Liverpool are this season, I would think, if not worse. And, they've turned it around fairly quickly. I suppose the counterpoint to that, certainly with Arsenal, is that they're sort of at the start of their project, whereas Liverpool feel very much like they're at the end of theirs. And you can inject some new young players into that, but can you turn around the whole sort of seemingly downward spiral of the team? That is an enormous challenge. But as we say, Klopp is one of the best managers around, if not the best. And, if he were to go, who do we get in? There's no obvious candidate and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think for me, the players are more at fault than Klopp. But obviously their performance ultimately rests with him. And if things don't change, as we've said, then he's going to be in trouble next season.
Yeah, I think for me, there's just a bit more of a disconnect than there ever has been when it comes to Klopp's approach and the group of players he has at his disposal at Liverpool. That's where I think the issue is, and that's why it's a bit of both, because I think Klopp's game, Klopp's tactics are not particularly suited to the players that he has. So in that sense, you could say, well, Klopp's to blame. It's Klopp's fault. Klopp should tamper his tactics. He should tweak things. I mean, he has, but that's what some people would say if they want to blame the coach. I would look at it more as in Klopp doesn't go anywhere. You have to give him players that can execute what he wants, and then you will. He's proved that if you do that, his game can deliver 90 points plus comfortably, which he's done over, I think, three times, 3 different seasons. So for me, that's the biggest issue. So this summer has to be, the priority has to be kind of give him players again who can execute his game to the highest level and won't encounter difficulties in doing it. And hopefully if we do that, we'll just demonstrate the same resurgence that we showcased a few years ago when we finished third, I think, when United finished above us. And you mentioned United there. United are a good example. United this season without Casemiro would have been very different. Newcastle United without Bruno Guimaraes would have been very different. Sometimes it can just take one player, and Liverpool, by all accounts, are going for at least 2 in the middle. If you get one summer right, it can change the whole landscape. Showed Liverpool a few seasons back. We got Alisson, didn't we? Fabinho, Naby Keita, and Van Dijk 6 months earlier, and went and delivered 97 points. Was it?
I think so. Yeah, something like
that. So it can change pretty quickly, but we'll wrap up there anyway. Interesting little episode, but Bees, solid debut, mate.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, I hope if I come on again at some point, we've got something a bit more positive to talk about. That was quite a miserable episode, probably, but a lot of good points to cover. And hopefully things turn for the better this weekend.
Yeah, no, I think every now and then it is healthy to do these kind of shows, though, where we kind of take stock and put a bit of perspective on it. Because lately, when I've checked Twitter and things, people have forgot about the original issues we started to suffer from and what we're suffering from as a result of the snowball effect, and that instead now starting to just suggest that we're just not there mentally, and Klopp's finished and Van Dijk doesn't care anymore, and all these daft narratives are starting to come out of nowhere. So these shows sometimes can help, I think. But yeah, thanks for joining us, mate. It's been a solid debut, as I said, and I'm sure you'll appear again on soon. And to those who have tuned in, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.